Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies? Well, apparently, I forgot to give you my theme song. And, it's too bad. You'll get to hear me talk instead. I'm sorry I did that. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting it. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. I feel like we should take off in this episode because this is Robservations, episode 747. That is correct. So, a lot of our time as imagination connoisseurs is taken up thinking about franchises. On the John Campea show this morning, we talked about House of the Dragon, the second Game of Thrones series, where Matt Smith plays a Targaryen, and we're going to go back 200 years into the past of Westeros and see what happened with that dynasty, as Michael Lonsdale said in Moonraker. Dynasty instead of dynasty. And that's fine. And, of course, The Eternals is going to open in less than a month. I can't wait. No Time to Die. I'm seeing tomorrow in IMAX. We got Star Trek Prodigy starting next month, or actually later this month. And we've got, Discovery Season 4. Woohoo! Star Wars, Star Trek, the MCU, Game of Thrones. We're all franchised out, man. I mean, and yet, we love our franchises. But you know me, I'm always looking at contrarian points of view. Now, before I jump into this, I just want to say I love the MCU. I do. I love the MCU. But in the newly resurrected Gawker site, Jeremy Gordon put out an article, hats off or hat tip to Mike Bodden for making me aware of this, that, man, I could not pass up. This was published yesterday in Gawker. And I had to share it with you. It's a long one, but we're gonna talk about it. The article is called "The Very Real Decline of All We Hold Dear Through the Progressively Shittier Spider-Man Movies." They really could be better movies. That is the headline of this article. The very real decline of all we hold dear as through the progressively shittier Spider-Man movies. Now, I know I'm not going full on clickbait bad guy here. You know me. I celebrate the positives. The only thing that I will rant on consecutively, not consecutively in shows, but maybe always. Consecutively is the wrong word. But you know me. Star Trek. The state of modern Star Trek since 2009. I mean, aren't you tired of hearing me? But that's the one thing that I will consistently rail on about. But this article, I wanted to share with you and talk about it because it has a lot to say about where we are. And I thought it was really interesting, the conclusions it draws. Again, Jeremy Gordon, look out from Gawker. Spider-Man, Spider-Man. You know the deal. Queens-born teenager Peter Parker, science whiz and pathological dweebus, is bitten by a radioactive spider, conferring upon him the proportionate strength, speed, agility, and extrasensory awareness of the humble arachnid. At first, Peter uses these superpowered gains to flex around high school and earn a little money, but when he fails to stop a common crook from murdering his dear Uncle Ben, he swears a vow to use his abilities for good, quote, with great power comes great responsibility, he remembers, a mantra passed to him by the departed uncle, and fight crime. Since 2002, they have made 7 solo movies starring Spider-Man, with an 8th on the way. The best of these, as well as I believe the best superhero movies ever made, are the originals: Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, and even, according to this author, Spider-Man 3. And here I will bray my truth like a frat boy at a party and declare flatly that Spider-Man 2 in particular is the best superhero movie of all time. I love how it transposes the essence of comic books into film, something that does not happen all that often despite the fact that superheroes are derived from comic books. It's in Tobey Maguire's doofy face and unvarnished inner turmoil, in Alfred Molina's tragic and Shakespearean villainy, in the cause and effect storytelling and clearly delineated morality, the bright, wide shots of New York City, and majestic action set pieces. The first one is pretty good too, as Willem Dafoe remains the only comic book actor capable of contorting his face into a cartoon drawing. Delightful films truly, if you are into all that bing bang boom and sweeping drama that can make for a jolly time at the theater, or more recently on the Saturday afternoon TNT movie slot. That said, they're just fun movies, and while I don't mean to denigrate fun, there are many movies that have meant more to me. There is a timeline in which I saw the Raimi films, enjoyed them in the manner that one normally enjoys a thing, good stuff, what's for dinner, and left them behind in my personal history. But in this timeline, something happened that precluded my ability to move on from the Spider-Man movies. They kept on making Spider-Man movies, and this time these movies were not delightful, but quite bad. I think you'll agree there are bigger problems, but something about the badness of these newer iterations felt indicative of a broader decline in the culture, and the emotions were all served at mass scale. Which sounds extreme, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Now, this author kind of had me right here with this introduction, because I feel that while I wouldn't say that the following Spider-Man movies are all bad, Andrew Garfield's first Spider-Man movie, The Amazing Spider-Man, I quite liked, and I've enjoyed Tom Holland in the role. Although, as this author points out, have we yet to get a real Spider-Man movie from him? Anyway, I have to pretty much agree with his premise that the movies, I wouldn't call them shittier movies. I think they're handsomely made. The second Andrew Garfield movie was all over the place, just like Spider-Man 3 was kind of an overstuffed mess. But anyway, backing up a second, the author goes on, Twitter is just Twitter. And I hope this paragraph is the last time I will mention it, but nonetheless, last year, the features editor of Screen Rant went viral for claiming that, quote, people dismissing comic book movies as kiddie shit are completely failing to realize superhero stories are essentially a collective American mythology and the closest thing to a shared lore that we have. To which hundreds, possibly thousands of people said no, along with some other mean things, and for a few days it became an opinion to casually refer to and confidently deride if you're a person who follows these things. Now, superhero stories are not essentially a collective American mythology because collective myths like Paul Bunyan and Johnny Appleseed are not bloodlessly mediated by corporate boardrooms with a burning fixation on generating profit, a wrinkle that essentially upends the entire premise. But given the ongoing cultural omnipresence of superhero movies in the 21st century, it's worth thinking about, inasmuch as you can softly and quietly have a thought about it. Nestled within the thousands of overlapping concerns marshaling our attentions, the role they play in reflecting and reifying social attitudes, less these movies are terrible as they often are, and more, it's unfortunate these movies are terrible because one of the most worthwhile parts of popular art is how it can galvanize disparate audiences around a shared appreciation for an idea, or even a set of ideas that make us appreciate the commonalities of the human experience. A sorely needed thing, I think. Now let me interject here. I don't think these movies are shitty. I don't think the MCU movies are shitty. They vary in quality, but really not by much. Go back and watch Iron Man 2. When was the last time you did? It's pretty damn entertaining. Even Thor: The Dark World, which I didn't think much of at the time, has grown on me, especially in light of the larger MCU as a whole. But anyway, he goes on. If you look at superhero movies as another delivery system for those collective abstractions, and how they could not be, being billion-dollar industries built around very basic narratives of heroism, villainy, occasional romance, etc., that are beamed out across the 7 continents, then it's worth taking them seriously beyond portending what this or that scene means for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A question posed in 1,000 worthless blogs. Again, this is the author, not me. I'm sure he would call me one of those worthless blogs, or this show. The features editor at Screen Rant wasn't totally wrong, but their mistake was in not trusting the people who dismiss these movies on account of being very bad. Because the movies are bad, and when they could not be, and with that comes the gradual collapse of everything we hold dear. If you want to go there with it, as I sometimes do. Now, I would like to interject here that I like this article because while I don't feel the MCU movies are bad, I certainly feel that modern Star Trek is bad. It has been bad since 2009, and it was, let's face it, pretty hit and miss since Generations came out in 1994. And even then, it was hit and miss. It's never been perfect or holy or sacrosanct or whatever. I've always been able to look at Star Trek and look at it dispassionately, up until 2009 at least. The Spider-Man movies they make in 2021, which star Tom Holland and plug into the Marvel Cinematic Universe Ouroboros that's eaten up mainstream cinema over the last 13 years, are structured more like television shows than films. This is not surprising, given the encroaching dominance of television in the visual arts, but it's jarring to watch a feature-length film that leans into its gifability and relies on comic misunderstanding for most of its plot tension. The dialogue snaps and pops like a writer's room impression of how people want to hear other people talk, depressingly capped off when Samuel L. Jackson, an actor who's been directed by Spike Lee, Martin Scorsese, and Steven Spielberg, quips, "Bitch, please, you've been to space," when Peter expresses some misgivings about his latest escapade. Not to turn this into a beat-by-beat chronicling of what the new Spider-Man movies get wrong, because we don't have all day, but they do fundamentally misrepresent something about Peter Parker that neuters all his pathos. His defining solidity as a character has been part of pop culture for the last 6 decades. A misrepresentation that neatly sums up the entire hollow structure. Since his inception as a character, Peter Parker has been motivated by shame. The burning knowledge that he could have prevented his uncle's death, were he not so self-centered. The first Spider-Man movie contains a horrible moment when Uncle Ben, played by a marvelously watery Cliff Robertson, is trying to impart something to Peter about the way a person must be, and Peter brushes him off with the callousness of a teenager. The exchange is played quietly. Robertson reacts like an adult who realizes he needs to back off, while Maguire is temporarily embarrassed by how he's hurt his uncle's feelings, though he doesn't apologize, much as a teenager would. If you are the type of person who abhors watching the elderly experience pain, the moment is firmly heartbreaking. Everyone who's had a loved one die remembers their final interaction together, and that Peter not just indirectly caused his uncle's death, but dismissed him in that last conversation, destroys him from the inside. He returns to it throughout the film. His lingering discomfort and his inability to tell the truth to his aunt animates the core drama of the sequel. Cliff Robertson is so poignantly avuncular, and Tobey Maguire so earnestly wounded, that it doesn't require too much exposition to hammer why this is such a resonant piece of his life. His uncle, his wonderful, sweet uncle, who is more like a father, died, and now Peter Parker must be Spider-Man. The life of a superhero is necessarily simple. The new movies, on the other hand, dispense entirely with this formative myth. When we first meet Tom Holland as Peter Parker in 2016's Captain America Civil War, he's already fighting crime, an understandable narrative shortcut considering his origin story had been told twice in the last 14 years. The less we say about Andrew Garfield's interminably mopey turn in the 2 Amazing Spider-Man films, the better. Again, I disagree with the author. I really like the first Amazing Spider-Man film. But now there's no reason why he should be a superhero besides the fact that he has powers as he tells Tony Stark, who replaces Uncle Ben as the paternal stand-in, whose eventual death, spoilers, sorry, comes to motivate him in 2019's Spider-Man Far From Home. Only Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Stark is a more sarcastic Elon Musk than anything genuinely benevolent, and the conflict Peter faces is whether he wants to become a member of the International Police Force SHIELD, a fairly depressing embrace of the security state that's par for the course in the film. If Peter lets down Tony's memory, he'll be declining to enlist as an extrajudicial cop responsible for enforcing worldwide order, as any teenager rightfully would? Good point he's making here. In just a few movies, we go from the death of a surrogate parent motivating Peter Parker to become a local superhero protecting his native New York City, to the death of a cool best friend motivating Peter Parker to become a global policeman. The stakes are more dramatic inasmuch as the world is bigger than Queens, but the feelings are all out of whack. On every scale, the clearly communicated emotions of the early films are transmuted into something cheap. Rosemary Harris's maternal and wise turn as Aunt May becomes Marissa Tomei's knowingly sexy, overly hip turn as Aunt May. Maguire's well of unease is filled up, replaced by Holland's antic quipping. The smoldering passion between Peter and Mary Jane, played by Kirsten Dunst as the eternally romantic girl next door, becomes an awkward exchange of glances and hugs between Tom Holland and girlfriend Zendaya, who failed to establish any kind of physical chemistry within the sexless crucible of these Marvel films. The author goes on, "What I love about comic books is how, at their best, they succinctly communicate the drives and feelings inside us all. An economy of storytelling forced by the medium's constraints. They're not as deep as literature, but they understand how entertainment can and should nonetheless contain something recognizably human, even in cartoon form. The Tobey Maguire movies remember this and root every challenge in believable emotion, even as we're ostensibly watching the adventures of a man who was bitten by a radioactive spider. He lives in a world, whereas the Tom Holland movies, enmeshed in a web of Marvel storytelling now encompassing more than 24 films, only refer to the dramatics of a branded universe. Peter's primary conflict now is whether he should be a Marvel superhero and team up with the Avengers. It's passably entertaining because the content creators of Marvel have landed on an acceptable formula. But it means nothing. Why does a Spider-Man movie need to mean anything? Obviously, there are lots of trapdoors around the present-day concepts of taking popular art seriously. At first you're thinking, this kind of sucks. And before long, you actually do end up writing what the new Spider-Man movies get wrong with the aggrieved tone of someone who is told by AppleCare they could walk into the store and get the part. The amount of time I've spent thinking about the Spider-Man movies is mocked by the pithy voice in my head going, bruh, come on. Better options for adults have always existed and may continue to exist until the industry tips fully over into China flattery and or every repertory theater is converted into a Hardee's. One or two bad movies do not make for an inflection point in these troubled times, true. But there is something about this accumulated slippage of quality and the emotions and ideas presented to us that reflects something cheaper in the culture. We have been awash in remakes of nerd shit for nearly all of the 21st century. And the loop between past and present grows tighter. Every couple of years, they give Ghostbusters another shot. 3 actors have played Spider-Man in the last 15 years. The charming and seminal Disney cartoons become laughably crappy live-action interpretations. There's a fucking sequel to The Shining, which climaxes with the phantasms of the Overlook Hotel, now in CGI form, showing up to exact vengeance on the film's villain. They did another Space Jam, one that conceptualized every Warner Brothers movie ever made. The Matrix, Casablanca, Harry Potter, etc., existing with the same interconnected metaverse of marketable IP. The homogenization of Hollywood and the race to monetize every piece of intellectual property under the sun is nothing new. In 2017, The Ringer dedicated a week of coverage to good, bad movies. The zany action movies and hokey dramas that are objectively sort of ass, but subjectively enjoyable, and how they no longer exist. More than any referendum on taste or quality, I think what characterizes a good, bad movie is the ease with which you can just watch it. It doesn't require any prior knowledge, any informed context. Meanwhile, the highest-grossing movie of 2019 was Avengers Endgame, a 3-hour film that would be completely incoherent without having memorized at least half a dozen movies before it. The banal credo of let people enjoy things that's often trotted out to dismiss any criticism of the modern goop that I'm complaining about avoids the basic reality that the only people who get to enjoy these things are the ones who don't need to read up on Wikipedia beforehand. I think if someone like my mom, who could be your mom or anyone else, a person who just likes to go to the movies and watch something that doesn't feel like it was auto-generated by an AI, or something that doesn't require knowledge of 16 other movies to understand, or something that doesn't joylessly stretch beyond 2 hours with no justification. Pleasure should be a democratized pursuit, not exclusively claimed by the nerds. The world gets worse and worse, and the very basic entertainments meant to provide some temporary distraction become more of a punishing, involved experience, requiring your fealty to the moment you walk into the theater. Recognizing this doesn't require any grand conspiracy, only watching the Spider-Man they made in 2002 and comparing it with the Spider-Man they made in 2019. Now you can see, gentle readers, kind souls, beings, however you identify across the 28 known galaxies, you can understand why I wanted to read this article. Because really, for me, everything comes down to Star Trek, but popular culture in general. I think the author, while I don't share his assessment that the Spider-Man movies are bad movies, but what he's talking about here, I believe, is spot on. One upside, though. During the pandemic, when the theaters shut down, any pretense of a lingering monoculture film-going experience evaporated altogether. Instead, we were all forced to make our own choices from the comfort of home, seeking pleasure on our own terms rather than settling for what happened to be in theaters at any given day, or by attempting to participate in some discourse. I do not write about movies for a living, and yet I became more of a film buff than I've ever been since college, afforded the freedom and time when I wasn't paralyzed by anything else going on, to roam a little. The choice has slowly drained from the theater. It was recreated at home, and judging by the diminished post-vaccine box office returns, something has changed about audiences, what audiences will go outside for. Well, since he wrote this article, that's certainly no longer the case. It would be naive to declare some subconscious desire for better movies. More probable is that people don't want to get COVID. With box office success no longer a winning bet for these gargantuan productions, although, as evidenced by Venom's box office, that has certainly changed, perhaps the studios will tilt away from trying to be everything for everyone and seek something more modest. It doesn't have to be anything as grand as great art. It might just be an organically fun, alive movie that asks people to enjoy it on its own terms. They're not going to make a better Spider-Man because there's too much invested in the current one. Besides, they did it back in 2002. Though Maguire is rumored to reprise his role in the upcoming Spider-Man No Way Home, quite literally the only thing that could have drawn my interest, but it could be something else. Something worth braving theaters for. Jeremy Gordon, who wrote this article, lives in Brooklyn. Now, Mike Bodden sent this to me, and I love this because it's touching on a lot of things I talk about. You've heard me bang on about it on this channel all the time, which is I want my favorite franchises to be better. And I think ultimately the reason that our franchises that we see dissatisfaction, whether it's Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, take your pick, even the end of Game of Thrones, is that we all understand and grew up with great classical storytelling. I think one of the reasons certain things endure, like for instance the original Star Trek, is even though it's pop culture, it's very much a pop sci-fi action-adventure allegorical show. You can understand the story no matter where you come in. It doesn't matter what episode you turn on Star Trek from the original series from 66 to 69, if you watch an episode, you understand what's going on. Even though you haven't been following the characters, you really get the story that's being told. You can understand if you watch a story like Balance of Terror. It's an anti-war story. There's brinksmanship. It's two submarines fighting in World War II. It's a wolf pack against, well, Tom Hanks's Greyhound. Call it what you want. But everybody gets it. And we understand that that episode is about the fog of war. It's very apparent. Now, one of the problems that I have, obviously, with modern Star Trek is I couldn't tell you, I could probably give you the overall story beats, but there has not been one story that has been told since 2009 that resonates with me at all. As a matter of fact, they've done just the opposite. They've resonated with me in the opposite way that I think is hoped. They haven't told a real story yet. There hasn't been a real story told in the Star Trek framework since 2009. All you're getting is other people's riffs on other stories. Now, you could say, well, Rob, Balance of Terror is just Run Silent, Run Deep. Well, that's true, but even Run Silent, Run Deep had a universality about it. You know, if you were to remove all the Star Trek accoutrements or whatever, it would still work as a story. Star Trek now is so far up its own ass that all it's ever about is Star Trek. Even when people give what they think today are great Federation speeches, they're just amalgamations of ideas that were already put forward in Star Trek for the 40 years it existed until, well, 40 plus years that it existed before we had the modern iterations of Star Trek. Now, I think the author's point here about Spider-Man, in that his entire raison d'etre, the whole reason he exists, is because he feels, like the author points out, shame and guilt over the death of Uncle Ben. That with his own powers he could have prevented, but he wasn't there. He wasn't there to do it. And it's that guilt that's driving him. Everything he does comes out of that. And it's pretty astute. I mean, I would say this to the author. We already understand that about Spider-Man. And Tom Holland's Spider-Man probably feels the same guilt, but rather than watch another origin story, we were spared that, so we didn't see it. I would dare say that it still drives him to a certain extent, but we haven't seen a real Spider-Man story yet. I think Tom Holland's Homecoming with the Vulture and what was going on there was part of it. But one of the great things about Spider-Man 2 is the personal relationship that Peter Parker had with the villain, had with Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. That's what makes that movie as good as it is. And unless you understand that, I don't think you really understand the character of Spider-Man. Just like the idea that modern writers want to come around and the character of Spock didn't already have enough problems being a man of two worlds. You have to saddle him with a learning disability. So that makes him, more relatable to the audience, as if Spock wasn't already one of the great pop culture icons of the 20th and now 21st centuries, and you have to go in and you have to turn him into something he's not. You know, I talked the other day, and I'm going to read a letter from a friend of ours. I talked about James Bond and the Daniel Craig Bond franchise. Now, I'm a fan of the Bond franchise entirely. The ups and the downs, and there's been some high highs and some low lows, but I enjoy the franchise as a whole. But one of the things about the Daniel Craig iteration of Bond is it's really been all about how he doesn't like being James Bond. He doesn't want to be James Bond. All James Bond has brought him is inner pain and turmoil, or being a 00 has brought him is inner pain and turmoil. And the problem is that James Bond likes being James Bond. And so do we, the audience. We like James Bond being James Bond. That's the whole reason we tune into escapist fantasies. All of our escapist fantasies are being subverted and turned into something that's more relatable to us. Like everything else, this idea of exceptionalism, this idea of being special, of being able to achieve great things, is something apparently that is no longer fair or desirable, because that would mean that we as the audience are in some weird way being put down. Like, everyone these days is an activist. Everybody has a cause. Everyone's like, see, I'm a crusader. I am a do-gooder. And let me tell you or show you what you're doing wrong. Well, who put people in that position? I don't know. I like to prefer the obvious, is that we have our characters. I like the fact that there are aspirational characters. Our fictional characters are aspirational ones. And to watch James Bond go up his own ass of grief and guilt and be mopey and all that, when really, I mean, I want to see a James Bond that can wear a tux, has bespoke suits from Savile Row, carries a Walther PPK, knows everything about everything, beds the most beautiful women, drives the best cars, works for king and queen and country, because who wouldn't want to be like that? And when you bring James Bond down to earth and saddle him with the same kind of emotional problems we all have, I'm far less interested in watching his adventures. I'm like, dude, I feel your pain, but I don't care about your pain. I want you to go kick Ernst Stavro Blofeld's ass, drive your Aston Martins, sleep with beautiful women, eat great food, kill a bunch of assholes that need killing. That's what I want from you. I don't want to mope around. I don't want to spend movie after movie worried about whether or not you're going to retire. This is not fun pop culture. And we're going to get to a letter. I'll go into that more. But, I mean, I understand that nowadays, as much as I like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I enjoy it, but I also recognize that, yes, it's the product of a machine that is guaranteed, or hopefully is guaranteed, to make money for shareholders. I get that. But that's true of anything. I was never one of those people that, well, when The Cure came out with Disintegration, or even Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, although I would dare say Disintegration was more populist than Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, that I would stop listening to them because they went mainstream. Every band wants to go mainstream. It's the whole point. You play music, you want to get paid for it so you can live a good life. I don't have any problem with commercial entities. What I do have a problem with is that now commercial entities control the kinds of stories that we're being told we need to hear. So what they're doing is they're subverting the actual form of storytelling itself. And I fucking hate that shit. I want stories that are genuine to themselves. The problem is we're not going to have any auteurist visionaries left to make movies because we're going to lose them all. The only filmmakers that are going to exist in the thralls of whatever corporate entity and whatever story that corporate entity wants our directors to tell. And who wants to live in that world? So, anyway, just my thoughts on this article. I want to thank Gawker for publishing it. I never thought I'd say that again, but here you go. I thought that was a good article. I wanted to share it with you folks. What do you think? I don't know. Let's see. I think we're going to start with Clint Eastwood today. I've read the Foundation series of books multiple times, though it's been a while since I reread them all, and I found the first 3 episodes a fairly mixed bag. I'm a big fan of the Foundation series and of Asimov in general, but I'm not a stickler for fidelity to the books. This would be tough because of the writing, which is brief, particularly in sections early on in the Foundation, partly because of his style and partly because of the narrative devices he uses for the book. The encyclopedia entries to tie together distant episodes in time. But also, let's face it, Asimov is more of a concept guy than someone who concentrates on beautifully written descriptions or on deep, detailed development of characters. The show has, for the most part, very good visuals. Example, the moving paintings, which is one of Asimov's writing's weaker points and one of the show's stronger ones. So well done there. But there are some puzzling choices. For example, for the life of me, I don't understand how they missed the opportunity of revealing Prime Radiance in all their glory. It's one of the few times Asimov launches into a relatively detailed description, and the way he speaks of the equations projecting onto walls around the readers and the psychohistorians is beautiful, very visual, and could have been a gorgeous rendition of the beauty of the mathematics, as well as a metaphor for its power. Story-wise, some aspects of the TV adaptation are great, including some of the innovations like the Triptych of Emperors, but some were baffling and unnecessary, at least to me in my opinion. For example, broadcasting Selden's trial did not feel properly set up. It makes no sense for the Empire to broadcast the trial unless it's made clear to the audience that the Empire has good reason to expect it'll be a show trial. Done deal. The conversation between Spy Guy and Gale Dornick was that chance, but it didn't feel like it. It also felt like the courtroom scene might originally have been longer and that the edit left the prosecutor's performance flat. Alexander Siddig, by chopping up the courtroom scene and killing the accumulation of tension. Also, it's weird how the end of that scene, after the advocate prosecutor seems to be setting Selden up for a rhetorical trap, he essentially lets Selden speak as he pleases to tell his story rather than go in for the rhetorical kill once he's in a corner. Selden, by the way, is pontificating, frustrated, and irate, which doesn't make sense since this is exactly the outcome he's planned for. Later on, the execution scene is supposed to be grand and spectacular, but there are only a few dozen people, maybe 100, watching in person. It was like Channel's awful egoist advert in space at an execution, and it reminded me of Deadpool's joke when he goes to pick up Negasonic and Colossus, and the network not being able to afford the other X-Men. But most of all, Empire's actions against Anacreon and Thespis, really a little on the nose even by Asimovian standards, make no sense. Not the spectacular nature of the retribution. Someone did need to be punished for symbolic reasons, but then just dropping the investigation, not examining the possibility of a third hidden hand, you'd think a galactic empire with vast intelligent resources at its fingertips would and could do more. Importantly, would know and want to do more. Harry Selden was written weirdly. He never speaks, he lectures, pontificates, which makes him a little unlovable for me, whereas in the book, he seems more like a kindly father figure, and I really missed the twisting scene in the book. On Terminus, we're supposed to buy into the fact that the people who have holographic projection technology on ships suddenly land and live in little better than tents. This seriously challenged my suspension of disbelief, particularly since then the area is shown to have very advanced energy shielding and propulsion technology, example, the speeders. Finally, the cutting to and fro in time made it really difficult for me to follow, and frankly quite annoying in places. It's potentially a good solution for the short, choppy nature of Asimov's writing in Foundation, but this audience member needed a little more hand-holding, although you'd think that the 1-hour-long episodes would provide ample space to do this already. Hopefully, the series will tie these elements together more smoothly. That comes from our friend Klimt Eastwood. Been here for a while, haven't heard from Klimt in a while. Great letter. I'm enjoying Foundation, but I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I think it's spectacle, and I have to say, my God, are they spending the money on the show, because it looks amazing. The world building is terrific, but Foundation was always going to be a tough proposition. But I do find the things that you brought up sort of strange that they're not getting into this more. I wonder how people that are not steeped in science fiction, how are they getting by? And I agree with you. The investigation into the terrorist activity, it seemed like it was sort of dropped, that nobody looked into anything. They just, well, you two are to blame. Let's kill you both, and then let's take it out on your home planets. It just seemed like, really? You're going to take that at face value? I mean, I would think that somebody who's able to pull off what they pulled off, that it would have been a little bit more than that, but perhaps that's just me. Yeah. But anyway, I do like the show. I want to see where it's going. I don't know where it's going, but I mean, I do know where it's going theoretically, but I don't know where it's actually going to take us. Now here comes the letter I was talking about. Our friend Undead Sick is back. Hello, Robert. I watched Let's Get Physical Media last Sunday, where I listened to your little rant about the Daniel Craig era of James Bond. And I had to say that as a movie and TV show critic and fan, I had some issues with what you were saying. So today, I'm going to challenge you, and I hope you will indulge me. Oh, yes, I will. From what you were saying, it sounds like you want all of these larger-than-life heroes to be one-dimensional and artificial characters with Terminator-like personalities. Could be that I misread you, but that's what I took away from it, and if that's the case, I strongly disagree with you. If that were the case, I'd strongly disagree with me too, but I'll wait and finish your letter. I want to give you some examples. Firstly, I would like to say that a little while back, I rewatched the original series of Star Trek. And while I really like the show, I have to say that I honestly feel Like all the characters seem like emotionless, cardboard, and cartoon-like people. And I don't like that. Wouldn't you want these characters to feel and act like actual humans? For example, I'm really looking forward to Strange New Worlds because I think Anson Mount is sublime as Christopher Pike. But I hope they don't toss seeing his own future away. And I ask you, would you want Pike to just throw up his shoulders and say, okay, I've seen my own death, whatevs, and just act like nothing happened and move on? Or would you want to see the emotional toll and weight I imagine he carries around with him? Personally, I already know the answer. You can have a strong leader and still see his vulnerabilities. The same goes for how much Jean-Luc Picard has changed in the new show Picard. Why is it so hard for people to accept that these characters can just as well grow resentful and bitter like the rest of us? Also, my favorite character of Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery was Lorca. Do you know why? Because we have never, at least to my knowledge, had an evil Starfleet captain, and I thought that was very inventive and original. But I can already feel myself getting dragged through the mud for saying that, because apparently it's very hard for people to accept change, and I give it a chance. Another example that I want to give you is The Last of Us 2, which is my favorite video game. Now, in the game, when Ellie watches Joel get murdered by Abby, would you say they should have written the story with Abby going like, ooh, so my father figure got killed right in front of me, but you know what, screw it, I'm just going to live a happy life now with lots of rainbows and kisses? Because you want all these escapist fictional superheroes to be above everything and everyone, right? Again, that's what I kind of took away from your James Bond speech, at least. But instead, we got this great story in The Last of Us 2 that dealt with some great themes that you could say take place in our actual real life as well. The Last of Us 2 is all about grief, anger, and revenge, which is why I love the game so much. Show me the humanity in fictional characters. I want to see everything, their strengths, flaws, weaknesses, etc. That's what makes it great, in my opinion. Even Abby, who is supposed to be the villain in the game, feels very human, and I could connect with her on a personal level. I could name more examples like Star Wars and The Walking Dead, but I think I made it pretty clear how I feel. And the same goes with James Bond for me. Even though they are fictional and larger-than-life heroes or characters, that doesn't mean they can't feel like human beings, and it doesn't mean they can't make mistakes and have foibles like actual people in real life. That's what makes the characters relatable, in my opinion. In closing, I would once again like to say that I could have completely misread you. You did. And if I do, I sincerely apologize. No apology necessary. I just feel like I had to give you my thoughts about this subject, as it was kind of bothering me. How do you feel about my thoughts, and can you see where I'm coming from? Greetings from Holland, Undead Sick. Well, first of all, Undead, a great letter. And I'd have to say this. When it comes to our fictional characters, you have to ask yourself, how were these characters conceived to be? And I think that with James Bond, we have to go back, and we know, because we have Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, and his literary works. He, as the creator, told us exactly who James Bond was and is. And I think that all great characters are not cardboard characters. Nobody wants a cardboard character. As a matter of fact, we want characters that we can believe in. But we want characters that we believe in the milieu that they're presented to us in. And I would say that one of the things about the modern age when it comes to our franchises, the things that I think drive a lot of us up the wall, and yet we express it in different reasons, is that all of our fictional characters are being turned into the same character. Somebody with foibles and shortcomings and inner turmoil. Well, my problem with that is, that's us. That's the audience. And the thing is, I don't want to relate to James Bond. I understand he's a man. So I'm a man, we have something in common. But the James Bond franchise, the James Bond character exists to provide a certain escapist entertainment. That's what the franchise was designed to be. Men want to be him. Women want to be with him. I'm sure that's all changed now. But that's how that character was conceived of. And now all creators across all franchises are trying to deconstruct these characters to make them more relatable to the modern audience, which I think is a function of our entire society. We're trying to make everybody the same. Every kid gets a trophy. We all have the same problems. Let's take anyone who's exceptional at anything and bring them down to earth. Make them relatable to us. We fear people who are good at things. Well, here's my problem. James Bond, if he's dealing with his trauma and all the problems in his life and his loneliness and the lost loves, he can't do his job in saving the world. He can't do the very thing I've come to watch him do. Which means the story that you're telling about James Bond is no longer a James Bond story. You know, in Star Trek 2, not Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, but in Star Trek as well, it's about an aspirational future where mankind is basically conquered, or Alpha Quadrant kind, all the members of the Federation, the member worlds, we've all sort of conquered our problems. We're better people than we were hundreds of years ago, which is why we were able to found the United Federation of Planets and work together and push out into the cosmos. And yet, nowadays, especially in modern Star Trek, you have a starship full of idiots in the Discovery. Idiots that are being led by a space perfectionist. Someone who, no matter what she does, whether she's insubordinate, whether she breaks protocol, whatever she does, she's still the perfect person and fails upwards and now gets command of the Discovery. Even though we're in the 32nd century. Why? Because it was your cockamamie idea that to save the world from control, an AI that was already destroyed or whatever, we had to take the Discovery into the future. I mean, it's bad storytelling, and it's the subversion of the form that I hate. So, look, I relate to James Bond because within the context of a James Bond story, we see many facets of the man. You know, there's a great moment in Spy Who Loved Me where Anya Mosva, Agent XXX, is going through his resume, and she says, married just once. And Bond says, okay, you made your point. And she looks and she's like, oh, you're sensitive. And Bond says, about certain things, yes. Well, in the context of that particular movie, that's enough. That humanizes Bond. He's thinking about the death of his wife, Teresa, from the end of Her Majesty's Secret Service. Spoiler alert. But there's enough within the escapist fantasy of a James Bond movie that tells me that he is a real guy. But I don't want to make that front and center. And in Skyfall, his anger at M drives him through that whole movie. You know, Quantum of Solace, he's rage-filled because he has to avenge Vesper, his love. Spectre, he ultimately falls in love with Lea Seydoux. I guess that carries on. And he retires and retires and retires again. I'm tired of watching a James Bond who wants to retire all the time because, the job's too hard. No, you know who's hard? James Bond is fucking hard. He's hard-ass, and that's why he can save the world. And I feel that all of our entertainments, like I feel your point about Last of Us 2. But, and sure, it's very emotional. I've only played Last of Us 1, which I really like, but I know a lot of people that did not like Last of Us 2 because they're leaning more heavily into, and I get it. You relate to the characters more. That doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right, but I'm interested in escapist fantasy. That's why I watch these things. You know, if I want, and by the way, if I want to watch something, I'll watch a Bergman movie, or I'll watch a film that really delves into John Cassavetes, for instance. You know, or one of the great indie filmmakers that deal with these kinds of themes. I don't want these themes in my escapist fantasies. I'm not saying it can't be that way. Sure, I want them to be mature and to have grown with me. But I feel that all of this relatability, because, everybody has to be relatable to everybody else now, because you can't be better than anyone anymore. We all have to be the same. Well, that kind of dangerous thinking is, I think, problematic in our society. But that's just me. And as for the original Star Trek, I have to completely disagree with you about the characters being cardboard cutouts. Watch the conversation between McCoy and Kirk, again, in Balance of Terror. There's a great exchange there. Kirk is full of self-doubt. And I hardly think they are cardboard characters. And the thing is, I don't have to convince you. History has already done that. History has told us that the pop culture of the world, Star Trek endured. And it endured for a reason. It endured because of the characters and because of the stories that were being told. And the fact that we're even getting an animated series, another animated Star Trek series, and that everybody's talking about. What I find really interesting now is now there's all these people talking about, well, in the last issue or the last episode of Lower Decks, because of the naked now disease or the naked time disease, everyone they were having orgies and stuff on the ship. And there's all these people defending that depiction. Like, well, there's all this other kind of sex that was alluded to. Yes. And you know what? If Star Trek Lower Decks depicted what happened in the last episode when I was a 5-year-old and was watching it, my parents would no longer let me watch Star Trek. And I'm saying, look, I'm no prude. Give me all the sex you want. But in the context of a Star Trek story, there's things you show and things you only allude to. Because it's a 4-quadrant family-oriented show. It's for everybody. Does that mean Star Trek can't be hard-hitting? No, and Star Trek has been hard-hitting. But there's no reason to show that depiction of something, especially in an animated series, and do it the way they did it. I was looking at that going, it's not that Star Trek doesn't have sexuality in it or doesn't it just doesn't need to depict it in the way that it does. Because I don't think that's necessarily what Star Trek is. Star Trek is inherently something, ask anyone, that the family watches together. My mom is a Star Trek fan. And if we watched that episode of Lower Decks, she wouldn't have dug it. But I've been watching Star Trek with my parents since I was a kid. A lot of the time I would watch it with my mom. And she liked it. And that was part of it. Families bonded over Star Trek. So I ask you, you can tell whatever story you want. But is it for families? Can families sit and watch it? I thought what Lower Decks was did was pretty tasteless. Sure, it was. Do I care? No. I mean, you can make things as hardcore as you want, but not in the context of a Star Trek story. And I think there's a fundamental, again, lack of understanding. But anyway, just me. Just me, maybe. Maybe it's other people too. I don't know. Our friend Calvin Bose says, the father of one of our favorite young imagination connoisseurs. Calvin writes, Dear Rob, I feel sometimes when you need answers to current issues, the best thing is sometimes to listen to people from the past. As you know, one thing that concerns me today is our cancel culture. And believe me, we are not the first in history dealing with this. In the past, they called it something different, but don't take my word for it. Let us see what the late Bishop Fulton J. Sheen had to say about this. Who was Bishop Sheen, you ask? Bishop Sheen would be the first televangelist. Now, please understand, a televangelist is just a person who uses the media to preach. Not to be confused with your Jimmy Swaggart or Kenneth Copeland, who are using faith to make money. In fact, he never made pleas for money on his program. His program was a weekly primetime network show, and he had 3 Emmy nominations and won 1. On his program, he would stand at a chalkboard and deliver his message. On one program, he talked about an issue called elitisms, what we would today call cancel culture. He said these people do violence, destroy people, tear property down. Their main purpose is to bring everything down. They always let us know what they are, but never what they're for. He went on to say, you can only build up, you can't build down. Bringing everything down is not a solution. I think we should take what Bishop Sheen said to heart. Look what happens today. We don't like police brutality, let's get rid of the cops. We don't like what Roseanne said, let's get her off the air. We don't like what John Wayne said in a Playboy interview in 1972, let's tear down his statue. We don't like the election, let's storm the Capitol and kill people. People say they're against all this stuff, yet give us no solution. They say they want inclusion, but that is a lie because the only people they want included are people who agree with them. So instead of having dialogue and discussing differences, they would rather tear them down. We all need to build up instead of tearing down. Well, Calvin, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that was to me the aspirational nature of Star Trek. That's what I loved about it in the first place. It was about people that got over their petty differences and built a future that I wanted to live in. Nowadays, the people being depicted on Star Trek are fucking idiots, and they can't build anything. They fail, and they succeed not because they're good at what they do. They succeed because, well, the writers say they do. And that's one of the reasons I can't stand modern Star Trek so much. It's really awful. But hey, what are you going to do? We are all goof people himself. Tom Jr. Jackson has written me a letter. Hey, Rob, today I want to talk about movies. Now, I know that both of us are diehard physical movie collectors and fans. As you may or may not know, I have quite the Kino Lorber collection. And by the way, did you know To Live and Die in L.A. is coming out on 4K Blu-ray? You would think with all my tagging of Kino Lorber that one of us would get something from them. Anyway, that's a subject for another letter. This one is about my collection of Criterion Blu-rays. You know what, Tom? I think I'm going to save this letter for Let's Get Physical Media and read it for that instead of on this show. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to forward this to Dieter Bastian right now so he reads it on Sunday's episode because I think that would be more appropriate, and I would love to hear this letter written in Dieter Bastian's German. I guess you can't call it a brogue, but there you go. So I passed your letter along. I hope you don't mind, Tom. No hard feelings, but it just seems to me that we should be reading this letter on the Physical Media Show. Shouldn't we? This letter comes from, this actually has a picture that I'm going to put up as I read the letter. Hang on, let me just put this, this picture, look at this. Okay, this is pretty dope. So this letter comes from Ian, or as you might know him, Pod Racing Palpatine. Pod Racing Palpatine did this one. And before, I'm going to put, here's a screenshot, this audio-visual aid. This is a picture of Pod Racing Palpatine out in front of the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square in Blighty in London town. That's where I went and saw Skyfall in 2012. Bond, London, Leicester Square. Hello, Rob, and all at the Post-Geek Singularity. A while back, you convinced me to go see the new Bond movie at London's Leicester Square. I had some time off and thought, what the hell? I'll treat myself. After all, why not make your first viewing of a movie the best it can be? My local cinema is okay, but it's not great. I could have slept through the entire 2 hours and 43 minutes of No Time to Die, not because the film is bad, but because the reclining seats are so damn comfortable. Anyway, on to the film. I enjoyed it as a whole. The action sequences are great and sometimes close up, so you feel you're right there in it. Beautiful, exotic locations are there to be seen. Those location scouts really do earn their pay. This film ties in nicely with Craig's previous outings as Bond and has some nice little Easter eggs. To me, Bond is a dual personality, in that he has to be suave and sophisticated, and on the flip side, he has to be a cold-blooded killer. I never believed that Moore or Brosnan was ever government paid or were ever government-paid assassins, but Craig totally makes me believe that he is. I won't ramble on too much or spoil anything, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film, and I'm glad you talked me into my first cinema experience since the rise of Skywalker, being this one. As the Heineken commercial says, worth the wait. This is Pod Racing Palpatine, last survivor of the Death Star, signing off. Pod Racing Palpatine, I'm glad you went to the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square. I so wish I could have gone there. I will go there maybe to see if there's another Bond movie. I'll go, although, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I could. This letter comes from our friend Hassan. I believe Hassan Chavez, maybe, or just Hassan. Hello, Dieter and Robert. This is for Let's Get Physical Media, too. Never mind. Everyone's, a lot of Let's Get Physical Media letters. My God. I guess that's good, right? Ruben Hilbers writes in. Hi, Rob and the people of the Post-Geek Singularity. Another day, another letter. Continuing my review experiment, today I'm going to take a stab at The Scorcher. And the subject is from an oldie, but a goodie. The medical show ER. Wow. No one's ever written a review of ER to this channel. Well, sort of. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the early seasons. Hey, an episode of ER called Love's Labor Lost is one of my favorite hours of television ever. But in the later seasons of ER, the verisimilitude started slipping a lot. Another reason that the later seasons cannot hold a candle to what came before is the characters. Whereas I know that many people love to hate Dr. Robert Romano, I simply hated the character. I've done more one ER rewatch, and it's always a great relief to see Romano get squished by that helicopter. Another character that really ruined the show is Abby Lockhart. Because outside the techno-babble of treating patients, all her dialogue is a never-ending stream of complaints and demands. Oh, my mom was so crazy. Oh, my childhood was so hard. I want this. My boyfriend did that. Yada, 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 and on it goes. What makes her character even worse is that the writers hooked her up with one of my favorite characters, Dr. Luka Kovac. This left me wanting to scream at the television more than once. Just dump her already, dude. Abby's constant complaining dragged the quality of this character down. This is very obvious when rewatching episodes of ER when he's an item with Carol Hathaway. And here's the scorcher part of this letter. I tried to think of some witty transition, but settled for simply saying that the main reason Luka is my favorite later season character is Goran Vilzniak. I can't pronounce that last name. Vilzniak. Luka is a tortured, guilt-ridden character, but never becomes unbelievable. To me, Kovac comes across like somebody you could run into in the supermarket, or maybe getting a cup of coffee in a local cafe. Combined with the fact that he's a doctor, I couldn't help thinking, give that guy the key to the TARDIS already. That wouldn't be bad. I thought that became semi-prophetic when he landed a role on the show Timeless. Furthermore, Vilzniak Naslavliak, the Vilnius schoolmaster. That's what I keep thinking. Furthermore, it's Visnik, right? It's Visnik. Has since played Nikola Tesla on Who. And with Peter Capaldi having set a precedent for the Doctor picking a face of somebody he met before, I'm hoping for history to repeat itself. Visnik for 14. Best regards, Ruben Hilbers. P.S. I almost forgot. Rumor has it that Visnik is a SG-1 fan. So when I wrote a fan fiction to finish the story of Stargate Universe, I used his face for the hero, Lieutenant Colonel Vale. Okay, enough shameless self-promotion. Well, I just want to say, Ruben, that no one's written in to talk about ER before, not in that way, and I want to thank you for doing so. Thank you for doing so. This letter comes from Tyler V. Tyler V. Tyler V says, Hey, Rob. I would just like to voice how disappointing it is sometimes when you find a movie or series you're really into, only to find out at the end that the writers had no idea how to end it. There are countless examples of this, but none more recent to me than the new Netflix series Clickbait. Oh, really? I want to get around to that. The show has a very interesting premise. The show stars Adrian Grenier of, Adrian Grenier, of Entourage fame as Nick Brewer. By all accounts, a decent guy, loving husband, father, family man. He ends up being kidnapped, and his kidnappers post viral videos online of him holding signs saying things like, I abuse women and I killed a woman. The catch is, they say that when the video hits 5 million views, he dies. So our characters are in a race against time to save him. The structure of the 8-episode series is really actually unique. Obviously, from the beginning, we're introduced to the people in his life, his wife, son, sister, who he's very close with, his mother, co-workers, etc. The way the story is told through is that each episode essentially focuses on one character and their relationship with him and any potential secrets they might harbor or how they might possibly be connected to what's happening. For example, let's just say the second episode focuses on the wife. During that episode, at some point, you're introduced to the wife's brother. There might be a flashback scene of where the brother and Nick got into a fight, thus making the brother a suspect. Then sometime in that episode, you might be introduced to one of Nick's co-workers, so that next episode essentially focuses on that person. What this does is create an ever-growing tangled web and essentially a game of Clue, where pretty much everyone you know could be involved, or at least know who is. Despite some convoluted melodrama that would make the day of our lives blush and lots of what you'd call delicious gobbledygook, I was fully hooked for 7 episodes. In a series chock full of red herrings and misdirection, I was excited to be watching something that simply I couldn't figure out. So then comes the big finale. I won't say anything specific about it, but this is what I would compare it to. Imagine the first time you watch Scream. You're totally engrossed trying to figure out who the killer is, only to find out at the end that the killer was Nev Campbell's Sunday school teacher's godmother. Pretty anticlimactic, right? Still, I overall enjoyed it. It's just disappointing when something is tainted by a terrible ending. I just wanted to bring this up onto people's radar. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Netflix, can we give a round of applause to whoever it was that allowed them to make brand new cherry flavor? Holy shit, I was pretty confident in my opinion that Malignant was the most bonkers batshit thing I'd seen all year. But that was before I watched this show. God bless the few people around that allow stuff like this to get made. What a glorious time we live in. Well, first of all, I got to say I'm totally with you, Tyler, on this letter. I don't like it when people can't stick the landing. You know, you'd think if you're going to do one of these convoluted mysteries that you have the ending that you're already going to figured out first and then work your way. I've been working my way back to the ending, babe, with a burning... Anyway, you know what I mean. If you don't have that, why would you do it? And it's when they don't have an ending, they certainly didn't have an ending for Lost. And I'm like, the problem was we all did. Everybody who watched Lost had an ending. They had something they thought was going to happen at the end. And what happened was, well, what they told us wasn't going to happen. So it was incredibly disappointing. Where you realize not only did they not know what was going to happen, they had to lie about it and lie about it and lie about it. And you realize they didn't have an idea better than what everybody suspected it was in the first place. I hate that. But yeah, I don't like that when that happens. And as far as brand new cherry flavor, as I've told people on the show before, I have the Todd Grimson's book, and I have it right up there. I've got a first edition hardcover of it. I bought it when it first came out, and I thought it was bonkers then. I can't believe it got made into a show 25 years later. That's an example of why the entertainment business still gives me hope, because nowadays we're in a position, even I'm in a position, where I know so much of this stuff. Like I can be like, yeah, I want to make this book that's 25 years old, and people are like, well, I've never heard of it. I'm like, I know. But it was published 25 years ago, and maybe you can get it made, just like Brand New Cherry Flavor. And when Brand New Cherry Flavor came out, it wasn't exactly the greatest horror novel in the world. I mean, it wasn't like Skip Inspector's The Scream or The Light at the End or something like that. But it was good, you know. But the fact they made it into this TV show, I mean, come on. We do live in a time of wonder. And that's why I can't get too mad, because there is such great stuff still out there. So yeah, let's see what you guys are saying. What are you saying? Is anybody even saying anything? I do not know. Oh, a lot of people have been saying a lot of things in the chat today. So why don't we jump into it and see what's going on? Willow, by the way, Willow sent in sends in probably a diamond sticker. Thank you. Willow reviewed the Voyager episode Bride of Chaotica, which I haven't read it yet, her review, but I'm going to read it on tomorrow's show. So tune in for that. Willow says, I can't remember if you've mentioned this, but have you watched the HBO series Warrior? I have not watched it all. I'm a season and a half in, and I'm really loving the show. Sad the third season won't be coming out until 2023. People love Warrior. It's just, I'll catch up to it again. I will catch up to it again. Whenever I watch shows and I don't watch them with Elizabeth, then she gets mad, and we have to figure out what is it that what we're going to watch. We got to watch it together. I mean, I tried to start her on a Wire rewatch, but I can tell she's not into it, even though The Wire is one of my favorite shows of all time. So we're jumping around. Then I tried to get her to watch The Chestnut Man. She's like, I can't watch this. So now we're watching Travels with My Dad, the British comedy show. It's just pretty funny. The British comedian who's driving around with his father, and she was watching The Great Bake Off last night. So that's what I have to get. I mean, what I need is a big screen in here and hook it up so I can watch stuff that Elizabeth doesn't want to watch out here. I haven't done that yet, but maybe I will. Julius Goodwin, the official sommelier of the channel. Julius Goodwin says, haven't seen you in ages, so I just wanted to drop in and see how you and Miss Elizabeth were getting along. That's very nice of you. We're getting along. Also, just for the record, I'm convinced civilization started to decline the moment Bob Chapek was made Disney's CEO. He's the wrong man for that job. Well, Julius, on the John Campea show, we talk about that a lot. He's no Bob Iger. But I think he's just a product. I mean, look, I understand corporate culture. You've been around long enough, you get promoted. But again, there are qualities to leadership that aren't on a spreadsheet. They're not on your resume. They're not on your I guess your relationships with people and the deeds that you've done show who you are. And I think that I think Bob Chapek is probably a little out of his depth. You know, when I worked in home video for Disney, back in the early aughts, and I worked both for another company and for myself. My company worked directly for Disney on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Bob Chapek was a very highly regarded guy, and I just think he's out of his depth, man. I think he's out of his depth, but maybe he'll step up, as many leaders do, under fire. He's had a tumultuous first year, but we'll see where he goes. Rhett Proctor sends in a super chat. Rhett says, "Hey, Rob, your channel is my new favorite." Well, it's very nice of you to say, Rhett. I love the name Rhett. I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm excited for Spider-Man No Way Home, especially since Tobey will most likely be back. Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. I haven't heard anything, but I mean, if they're bringing, if it's a Spider-Man gangbang, and I mean that in the best way, watch somebody to send me some wholly inappropriate photos. But I do think that we're going to see a lot of fun stuff happening in Spider-Man No Way Home. I actually really like was it One Fine Day? That's the George Clooney, Michelle Pfeiffer movie, but what is it? The when Mephisto, he has to make the deal with Mephisto and he loses MJ and all that stuff. What is it? The Straczynski story. I think it's kind of a riff on that, which makes sense. That everything changes because Peter Parker said, "Listen, can't you just cast a spell and make people forget that they know who I am?" I love that premise. I don't know how much of a Spider-Man story it is, but I mean, it's obviously a Spider-Man story. But in terms of addressing what the earlier article addressed, but I think that I can't wait for the movie, man. I think it's going to be good. I've liked all the movies. I liked all the Spider-Man movies, to varying degrees. So, I mean, plus my quarter scale Hot Toys, my deluxe quarter scale Hot Toys Spider-Man is one of the best Hot Toys that they make. Jeff Yerke is here, and of course Mrs. Y. Jeff Yerke, I don't think I've ever met a man that loves his wife more, because he takes her everywhere, even when he comes on to the chat boards on this channel. He does not do it alone. What a romantic. What an imagination connoisseur par excellence, Jeff. Jeff says, "Hi, Rob. Greetings and felicitations. Not much in my pop culture report from Northern California this week. We watched The Many Saints of New Jersey, The Many Saints of Newark, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Alessandro Nivola totally crushes it. Be well and live long and prosper. The Yerk Man." Remember when he played Nicolas Cage's brother, Castor and Pollux Troy? They were brothers in Face Off, if John Woo's Face Off. The Yerk Man. Be well and live long and prosper, Yerk Man. Well, right back at you, sir. I hope you're living long and prosper. Certainly, I hope Mrs. Y is. But yeah, I haven't watched Many Saints in Newark yet. I want to see it in the theater. And tomorrow begins I'm going to be catching up in the theater and see all the movies I've been missing. But No Time to Die, tomorrow night, IMAX the Chinese. I'm very excited. Ooh, the Richard. Not the Richard, just Richard. Richard sends in a tip and says, "Spider-Man plays a different role than he did in the Raimi films. He's not at the center of this character's solar system. He's currently an outer planet, playing the role of the fall guy rather than conflicted hero holding up the world." Ooh, that's interesting. The Richard goes on, "The central character of the MCU always defaults to the Icarus character. First Iron Man, and I bet Reed Richards. Forget Feige's statement about Captain Marvel. She's just another outer planet like Spider-Man. Doctor Strange is a little closer to the sun." That's actually a very astute observation, Richard, but I would say that that's true for the whole MCU, but I think a Spider-Man story, he can't be a Spider-Man story. He can't be an outer planet in his own Spider-Man story. But I think you're right. I mean, if you think about it as the MCU as a whole, and every one of these films is serving a much wider universe by definition, I can understand that. But I think that the article that was on Gawker, I think the article is pointing out that maybe the films told a more effective, resonant story when they weren't necessarily connected to a wider universe, except the universe of the films themselves. So, but it's interesting. I never quite heard it put that way, but that the characters are outer planets, and it's the Icarus character that, literally next month there's an Icarus character, but that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I quite enjoy that idea. The Jughead Says, hi, Rob. Methinks Jeremy doth protest too much. I think Nicholas Hammond is the best Spider-Man. Laugh out loud. Only kidding. I saw the latest Bond last Sunday. It's not as good as Skyfall. The Jughead goes on to say, I'm looking forward to the next episode of this fine series. Connery is still king, though. Love and respect from the UK, bro. Well, Jughead, yeah, I've heard very mixed things about Die Another Day, or No Time to Die, by Bond fans and friends I trust, and I understand where they're coming from. I don't necessarily agree, but I'm going to have to see it myself, which will happen tomorrow. Elizabeth and I will go see it tomorrow. Glenn Mark says, hi, Rob. Regarding Venom 2's box office, no, I wonder also if this has to do with word of mouth about the mid-scene credit possibly featuring... I'm not going to say the answer to that, even though people are going to see it. Okay, Spider-Man. The mid-scene is the only reason I have any interest in going along to it subsequently, because I'm a stickler for order, and now I'll have to watch Venom first. Well, Glenn, I think there's more than that. I mean, I think, look, from my perspective, I want to see the Venom Carnage fight. You know, I know it's CG effects and all that, but I like watching monsters fight. So to me, the Carnage Venom throwdown is worth the price of admission. But of course, the end scene is spectacular, or so I've heard. I mean, it's been described to me a million times, but I want to see it. Can't wait to see it. But I think that's why, you know, a lot of the reason it did what it did was because you know, people want to have fun. They want to see a good throwdown. But yeah. So let's see. Rhett Proctor comes back and says, Rhett says, I'm super excited for tonight's episode of Stargirl, especially since we finally get to see the original Justice Society. I know, I got to watch that too. I'm also happy that Joe McHale will be a series regular next season. Joe McHale went to my high school after I was out there, but went to my high school. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see the depiction of the JSA. I loved it in Smallville when we got to see the JSA. So I can't wait to see what they're going to do. And obviously, you know, Jeff Johns wrote the Justice Society of America for a very long time. And hopefully it'll be great. I can't wait. So yeah, I'm excited. I didn't realize that was on tonight. Julius Goodwin comes back and says, for the record, sir, if you want to be entertained and admire someone who serves his country, drips sophistication and knowledge with every word, dines on the finest food and wines, and beds a beautiful woman, you only have to look in a mirror. By the way, I didn't write that. Julius wrote that. Thank you, Julius. That's very nice of you. I don't know if I've served I haven't served the country the way some have. Although I do regret. There was a time when I would like to have gone. I think a stint in the military would have done me well. You know, if I'd gone into the military for 4 or 6 years and at least learned that discipline, military discipline, I could have used it, to be honest. And I think it would have been interesting. I would have learned a lot. So, yes. But thank you for that. It's very nice of you to say. That's very kind. Mikey Lito, our own Mikey Lito, who was on the show. By the way, I fixed the title of Sunday's show after our conversation and made it a little less provocative, a little less clickbaity, and I didn't quote that after having that conversation because I would not have wanted Polly, your Aunt Polly, to have seen my headline after talking to you. So I changed it. Mikey says, ooh, thoughts on Star Trek Coda, Moments Asunder. For those of you who don't know, we've talked about it on the show before. The first book of the trilogy, one came out this, Dayton Ward's first book in the trilogy, Moments Asunder, and then there are 2 more books that are coming out, one in October, or one in November. Or wait, no, there's another one coming out this month, and then the other one comes out in November, and it ties up the Star Trek Litverse that I've been reading, the last 20 years of post-Dominion War continuity, and it's an epic story. Now, I will say this. I don't want to spoil this for anything, but Mikey, since you're asking, I quite enjoyed it. And I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about Moments Asunder is there's 2 things. The antagonists, as they're being set up, are not what I would say are antagonists. If you ask Star Trek fans, what are some of your favorite antagonists that have been portrayed in the Star Trek universe? The antagonists or apparently the antagonist, that could be a diversion or a misdirect, but the antagonists as they are portrayed are not who I would have expected them to go for. And also, one of the central characters in the book, they're leaning heavily into somebody that's never been the most well-liked person, even though I love the fact that they've taken those antagonists and made them far more interesting than they probably have a right to be, and far scarier. And then this protagonist, I love the fact that they've turned him into somebody that, let's just say, was not well liked, but now is one of the most. He's very likable in this book series. But so the book series is basically, it's going to be it's Crisis on Infinite Star Trek Universes is what it is. And it's really, really interesting. And I will say this, and I love, well, I'll just say this. Imagine if you were able to create a branch universe. And the only reason you created, and think about it, the infinitude of a branch universe. Like, you created a new timeline, and you have this branch universe that has everything, and the only reason you created it was to consume everything in it. So people are creating divergent timelines basically to devour them. And that's that's a plan I'd never heard before. And in doing so, they're destabilizing the rest of the multiverse. That's what the antagonists in this book are doing. And I think that's a pretty damn brilliant idea. I thought it was it whipped along with a brisk pace, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I wish it was twice as long. I was pretty into it, man. I whipped through it. Ray Valero says, hey, Rob, do you like any of the Brosnan Bonds? Yeah, I like 3 out of the 4 of them. I love GoldenEye. I really like Tomorrow Never Dies. I think Tomorrow Never Dies is... I think the only problem with Tomorrow Never Dies is a lot of it was edited out to be short for time. But I really like... And I'm a fan of World Is Not Enough. And there's a couple of great scenes in Die Another Day. Die Another Day. I love the opening. I love the sword fight. But the rest of it's pretty ludicrous. But I like the first 3 Brosnan Bonds. I really do. I find them very enjoyable. They're very enjoyable as sort of 80s and 90s, well, they're 90s action films. They don't get really deep, but they're really well made. They're really fun to watch. I like Robbie Coltrane's character, and there's a lot to like about the Brosnan Bonds. Glenn Mark says, hi again, Rob. Were you unable to get the audio letter to work? Oh, no, I got it to work. I just forgot to load it up on today's show. I'll do it for tomorrow's show. Wondering what happened with it. Will I have to unfortunately send it in writing? And said, no, you won't. I will put it up. I will put it up tomorrow. I just, you know what? I forgot to because I was out and about right before I went on the show, and I forgot. Doomed, huh? Sends in a live long and prosper super chat. Thank you, sir. Poochie sends in a super chat, probably a sticker. I might have missed it, but thank you, Poochie. Richard says, it's amazing how you Americans love our cheapish, candy-coated British reality shows. My stepmother is American, and she watches hours of Bake Off and travels with my father. It feels quite bizarre. I'm not sure whether to be a proud Brit or ashamed one. Well, first of all, travels with my father is hilarious. The dynamic between, and I got to tell you, I think it's funny because the disparate idea of this guy in his late 70s and his son going on these travels around the world, the dynamic they have is, I think, irresistible, especially for us Americans. But I will say this, the end of season 3 when they go to Vegas, I won't say what happens, but come on, man, it's pretty funny. But at the end, when the father and son, when Jack and his dad are talking about what these travels mean to one another, it's actually, I got choked up. And I have to say, the Bake Off shows, the thing about the Bake Off shows is, with all these kind of reality competition shows, you got to see who wins, and you got to see what they make. And there's something, you know what I like about a show like The Great Bake Off? I'll tell you what I like about that show. Everybody's nice to each other. Yeah, there's tension or whatever, but people are making things. It's not like no one's trying to get knocked off of a post, or you're not trying to You're not trying to get ahead through subterfuge or something. It's just you got a bunch of nice people trying to get ahead by baking, and I find that kind of uplifting, and I think that's why Americans like these shows, is because they're funny and uplifting. I know, never feel bad about it, because you're a Brit. Remember, you got your dark shows too. Look at Richard Madden in Bodyguard. That was dope. I love Bodyguard, and look at Luther. So for every Bake Off and Travels with My Father, there's a Luther and a Bodyguard too. So have no fear, sir. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Royce Freeman says, if Spider-Man exits the MCU, can characters mention his absence by saying the kid when referring to him, or just saying Peter? You know what? I think they'll be able to mention Spider-Man, because I think they're moving into a new era of cooperation. That's détente, General. I think they're going to do that. Because why? It's mutually beneficial for everyone. I think part of the excitement for Venom is, in fact, Spider-Man. I believe that. And Venom and Carnage and all that too, but I do think that's part of it. Louis sends in a super chat, or Lewis, could be Lewis. I'll say Louis. Regarding mysteries and pre-planned endings, I got to stick up for Nowhere Man. I super chatted about it a while ago. The end was planned from the go, despite the roaming fugitive Adventure of the Week format. Great show, but we never got to the end of Nowhere Man. Nowhere Man was a UPN launch show that came out at the time, right? It was with Bruce Greenwood as the Nowhere Man. It was part of the UPN launch that brought us Star Trek Voyager. And I'm sure it was, but it just didn't get very far, unfortunately. I liked Nowhere Man. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty cool. And our own Dieter Bastian is in the chat and says, Rob, thanks for recommending The Chestnut Man. 9 out of 10. Ooh, and from Dieter, that is a big deal. Well, Dietz, if you dug it, I'm glad you dug it. How about that? I was grabbed from the opening. Pretty darn cool. Julius Goodwin is back. Julius says, with the whole Chapek situation at Disney, I ask, what role do corporate executives even have in the industry? They mostly seem to interfere with the creator's vision, such as the situation where Kevin Feige's MCU was almost ruined by Ike Perlmutter. I think that's a really good question. I think the reason that you have these executives, these Ivy League business school educated people, is that they're there to protect the money. I honestly believe that. They are there to protect the money. And kind of like Vesper Lind is there to protect the money in Casino Royale. And I honestly believe that's their purpose. And that's why they like Ivy League educated business people. And you ask, well, what do they have to do with movies? And the answer is, well, not much. But I honestly believe that it is indeed because of money. They have these people that are trained in how to deal with money. They've gone to school. They've got their master's degree at some of the best institutions in the United States to deal with money. And that's why they're there. And they want to make sure that everything is protected. And I think that's it. And it's unfortunate because the business of making movies obviously is storytelling. But the thing is, movies are now so expensive, especially at the studio level. If you're making a movie for $100 million, $150 million, or $200 million, you damn well better have people that know how to protect that investment. Because if no one cared, if the creatives were left in charge, they'd be like, yes, let's make a historical epic for $200 million. And a studio is not like Netflix. Netflix is like, oh, we'll make it rain for you, Marty. Killers of the Flower Moon, or whatever the movie's called, $200 million for that. I'm sure it's going to be great. I'm a huge fan, but who knows? But it's for the money. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I missed your super chat. Oh, I did. I didn't even see that. Was it there? Wait a minute. I've missed 2 super chats. Sometimes they don't pop up right away. And let me go back. Edmund Walker's glasses. Edmund Walker tipped and said, having waited the long wait with you for No Time to Die over the past forever, I'm almost more excited for you to see the film than me. Have you considering hired your own nursing staff, bodyguard service, and motorcade to ensure you make it to the theater tomorrow? Yeah, no, I'm going with Elizabeth. Wouldn't that suck? You know, I keep remembering. I think it was Warren Zevon, Werewolves of London. Before he passed away, he knew he had terminal cancer or something, and he said, "I want to see the next James Bond movie." I feel that way. If I die on the way to the theater tomorrow, I'm gonna be pissed. I'm gonna be pissed. But at least you know what? It'll be ironic, Edmund, because you'll be like, "Oh my God." And oh wait, by the way, since you brought it up, if I die tomorrow going to the theater, I blame you. And everyone here should blame you. That's it. You're blamed. Tom Jr. Jackson. Oh, Tom asks about my thoughts on La Brea, dude. Oh, man. This year's Manifest. I know all about La Brea, but I have yet to watch it. I've got to sit. Maybe I'll do that when I get off of this stream in a few minutes. Yeesh. I got to watch it, though. For those of you who don't know, La Brea, and I live. If you've ever seen the movie Volcano with Tommy Lee Jones and Anne Heche, and it's Tommy Lee Jones, right, in Volcano? That also, it's about a volcano that starts basically at the La Brea tar pits. Well, in La Brea, the La Brea tar pits sink into the earth. People fall in. They find themselves in a strange land, a prehistoric land, because you know that. It's Land of the Lost, but it's Land of the Lost literally meets Lost meets Manifest. I'm surprised the beginning of La Brea doesn't have a song that's like Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition and the greatest earthquake ever known. Hi, whatever, you know, Land of the Lost, and that's basically what it is. But who and why and what's happening? But I hear like prehistoric animals get out into the skies of LA. I'd see that shit. I gotta watch that. I haven't seen that, Tom, but man, I can't wait because don't think I'm not going to watch that because you know I will. You know I will. So thank you, Tom, I'm sorry I missed your super chat, but they weren't there when I was going through my software. It happens. It happens. Richard says, can you put on your screenwriting cap one more time tonight and tell me any meaningful internal change Shang-Chi had from San Francisco to putting the rings on in the final act? Oh, well, I think the meaningful thing was he actually went to find his sister. You know, he hid. He left, and he felt an obligation to go find her. You know, he went to hide, and he had given up that life, and then he went to look for her, and that was something that you know he took off and didn't talk to her, so he bit the bullet and went out to find her. And then I would say that he went and took on responsibility he had shunned, and I think that's definitely there's definitely something to be said for that. And internal change, I think that he was a character that had been hiding from himself all of this time. And the change that he made was that he stopped hiding from himself and he took on the responsibility he should have taken on a long time ago, and confronted his father. He shouldn't and shouldn't have left his sister behind. I mean, that's what I would say just off the top of my head. Kevin the Comic Doctor. By the way, if you haven't, Kevin the Comic Doctor has his own YouTube channel, and Kevin the Comic Doctor, he literally is a comic doctor. He will clean and pressure comics, not. He will not make them. He doesn't restore them. They're still the same old comic. He just makes them a little bit more spiffy. So when you get them graded, he also has a comic channel, and he lives in America's Hat. Kevin says, "Hiya, Rob. Hope you're doing well. Here's my idea about Venom in No Way Home. Spidey is no match for the Sinister Six. That is, until the symbiote merges with Peter to take them down. Do you think Venom will merge with Peter at some point?" Oh. Yes. Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the post-credit sequence of Spider-Man No Way Home is Venom merging with Peter Parker. I never thought about that until just now, Kevin. But you know what? Of all the people, you would know. You would know. And on that shocking revelation, I'm going to bring Robservations episode 747 to a close. My God. Oh, what a rollicking time this has been. I want to thank everybody for being here. Once again, I want to thank my moderating staff. Louise X. Sparrow is here. Justin Toner is here. I don't know who else is here, but Justin and Louise are here. And let's face it, when you got Justin and Louise, come on, you're covered, right? Anyway, I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank all of the moderating staff of this channel. I want to thank everybody that becomes a member of this channel. Thank you for that kind of support. Very much appreciate it. And for those of you who support the channel generously through super chats and tips, thank you very much. Oh, speaking of that, Cyber Shaman X. Yeah. Oh, this is good. You know what? Cyber Shaman X, you're correct about this. Cyber Shaman X says the afterword of Star Trek Coda was hard to read. It was almost like a parent explaining getting divorced. You see, your mom and dad love you very much, but sometimes things have to change. Okay, I gotta explain this. So, for those of you who might not know, I've been a big fan of the Star Trek novels. The Pocket Books Star Trek novels have been, and Simon & Schuster, they've been published since 1980. And actually, even before that, because the first book of theirs was the novelization for Star Trek the Motion Picture, which, by the way, you should read because Gene Roddenberry wrote it, and it is unfiltered Roddenberry. There's some incredible stuff in that book. So, what has gone on in the Star Trek novels over the last 20 years since a Deep Space Nine book called Avatar, 2002? There has been a continuity. There has been a post-Dominion War, post-Nemesis continuity. Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, and it's been really great for the most part. I've really, really, really enjoyed it. And a lot of these authors, especially James Swallow, Dayton Ward, and my favorite, David Mack, the only person they could have added to it, add a fourth book, would be Christopher L. Bennett. They've been writing great stories that have really advanced the Star Trek universe over the last 20 years. And in my mind, you know, it's not canonical, but it's very, very tight, close-knit continuity, and it's been really fun to read. It's like reading some really great big story. And these authors love Star Trek, and they're painstakingly researched. It's a joy to read if you're a fan of that stuff. And frankly, the Star Trek universe as depicted by these authors, I don't agree with everything that they've done, but for the most part, there is an intelligence and an imagination brought to bear in these books that far exceeds anything even remotely close to what the drivel that we've been given as Star Trek since 2009. And what's happened is, because nobody was ever going to do shows right after this, it appeared that that part of Star Trek was over. The authors never worried about whether or not they were going to upset. Now, Star Trek Online came along, but those are two different continuities, so it wasn't a big deal. But the Litverse, as they called it, was a great place to be. And as a Star Trek fan, that's where I went to get, quote-unquote, real Star Trek stories. And, well, with Picard, I think that the thing about Picard that's so frustrating, the TV series Picard, when they decided to make it, and they did what they were going to do, in thoroughly ruining the character of Jean-Luc Picard and adding and creating a galaxy-wide situation that is so stupid and dumbed down. Why don't we call it what it is? Inane. These authors that had been creating this continuity, I'm sure they weren't given a choice. I'm sure that John Van Citters, who now is the brand manager of Star Trek, basically, he used to oversee consumer products, and he was the guy that oversaw the publishing books. And to be fair, I love John Van Citters, aside from the fact that where's my Art Asylum or my Diamond Select Enterprise Zebra? You promised me this back in 2012. Do I have it? Oh, wait. No. I got the Eagle Moss XL one, but I don't have that. Come on, John. Anyway, John's done a great job of overseeing the literary universe, but now, just like the fact that XO6 has to make Discovery figures, and we'll see how those sell. You know, how do they sell? We'll see. So the Great Litverse, because the Star Trek Picard series completely destroys their continuity, they have to end the story. They have to end their litverse. And they've chosen to end it in grand fashion with a Marv Wolfman. They're doing exactly what Marv Wolfman and George Perez did starting in 1985 to the DC universe. You can't see it, but can you see it behind me? Well, this. Yeah, I can pull this out. So, look at this. Here is my Graffiti Designs Crisis on Infinite Earths hardcover. Marv Wolfman, actually. I went to lunch with him at Jerry's Deli, and this is pretty dope, though. So, look at this. Look at this badass Alex Ross cover. And, of course, as I'm wont to do, this has a bro dart on it to keep it in good condition. But imagine that Star Trek Coda imagine instead of all those Earths that it's the different Star Trek universes. So, and they're being destroyed. They're being destroyed, as does happen to. So there you go. And by the way, this is underneath. Of course, is my big hardcover box set of all the Crisis on Infinite Earths books. So this appeals to me, but they're doing it because the Picard series doesn't. The Litverse is so far away from the Picard series. I mean, if they were smart, like if I was actually running Star Trek and I was being tasked with making a Star Trek Picard series, and this Picard series would take place probably a decade after the Litverse ends, but they have to end the Litverse, so they're doing it in grand fashion with their own Crisis on Infinite Earths event. And when it's over, I think I have a theory of what they're going to do. But the universe is going to be then they're going to say that the Star Trek Picard, the Litverse, the universe has been destroyed and rebuilt, and whatever reality is left, and I hesitate to call which reality that's going to be, even though I know what they're going to say, that reality, the Picard reality, is the reality where we're at now. And the problem that I have with that is that Star Trek Picard is so bereft of any good science fiction ideas or any good ideas from Star Trek. And even the stuff, I mean, they've ruined so many. They ruined the Romulans. They ruined the Borg. They ruined Seven of Nine. They've ruined Picard. And they've ruined all android life. They've ruined everything. That shows completely destroyed Star Trek continuity. Star Trek Picard, especially if you've read those books, because the Star Trek novels have been so interesting and so thoughtful, especially read David Mack's, he wrote a whole trilogy about the Noonien Sung androids, and it's great, and you should read it, and it's fascinating, and it's infinitely better than what they did with Synth Uprising and Mars, all just fucking dumb shit. I hated it. But anyway, Cyber Shaman, I know I'm going off on a rant, but thank you for bringing that up. But it was reading that afterward. You look, these guys are all now working or consulting, like David Mack's consulting on Prodigy and probably has a lot of input into it. So they're not going to say anything. They're not going to get mad. But, in their heart of hearts, they know. And I think by doing Coda, they got paid one last time for writing this version of the universe. I think it's disgusting that all this work over 20 years by these great authors who know Star Trek way better than Alex Kurtzman and any of his cronies. Ugh. Anyway, Cyber Shaman X, yeah, it was. To answer your question, it was exactly like reading about parents who are getting divorced. And on that note, I want to thank you. I thanked everybody already, and I would say that Tango Shalom is still playing at 8 theaters this coming weekend. I'll post those at some point. And on November 4th, for all of my Russian friends, if anyone in Russia in the CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States, not from India, but in Russia, Tango Shalom opens theatrically everywhere in Russia on November 4th. So there you go. Speaking of Tango Shalom, I will say before that, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, have a better day. And this will be the end of Robservations, episode number 747. I guess that means I'm leaving on a jet plane now.
I had a dream.
Hashem told you to dance in a tango contest?
A dancing teacher wants to tango with you?
No!
Critics are raving about Tango Shalom. It's clever and inventive, with right chemistry on and off the dance floor.
You're a lunatic!
A funny and thoughtful family film with a warm heart and a playful spirit. From the director of My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Oh, that's my Fernando.